Alright, what's up fantasy fans? So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite tropes. It's a trope that I've been very much gravitating towards lately, and that is the hero in black and the monster in white. And I think no series better portrays this. This is one of the first to do it. Well, at least the first to do it as far as like stuff that I'm familiar with, and I still think it is probably the best to do it, and that is Wars of Light and Shadow by Janny Wirtz. The Wars of Light and Shadow were fought during the Third Age of Aethera, the most troubled and strife-filled era recorded in all of history. At that time, Arathon, called Master of Shadows, battled the Lord of Light through 5 centuries of bloody and bitter conflict. If the canons of religion founded during that period are reliable, the Lord of Light was divinity incarnate, and the Master of Shadow a servant of evil, spinner of dark powers. Temple archives attest with grandiloquent force to be the sole arbiters of truth. Yet contrary evidence supports a claim that the Master was unjustly aligned with evil. Fragments of manuscripts survive which expose the entire religion of light as fraud and award Arathon the attributes of saint and mystic instead. So we have the characters of Arathon and Lysair, and we're going to stay spoiler-free for all of this content. Well, spoilers vague. But what I think this series does so well is it juxtaposes the Shadow Master type character of Arathon with this very noble character of Lysair, or seemingly noble. And what we get in this series is this examination of this very self-righteous... I would even go as far as to call Lysair a villain at times. I know a lot of readers don't. They like to say that he's morally gray, and I do think he's morally gray. You can't understand him. There is trauma that goes towards the way he conducts himself and the way he treats his brother. But I think that the way he views Arathon shows a distinct lack of empathy that, in my opinion, is inexcusable and does put him up there and as a villain in my mind. And, you know, one thing that I think this series does so marvelously well, I mentioned it on my live chat with Jake, I'll link that somewhere on the screen. The way she plays with the perception around Arathon while very rarely giving us Arathon's perspective. You know, so many people in this world, they think of the Shadow Master and they think of this vile character that we as the reader know to not be true. And she plays with this throughout the series. And there are even times where you as the reader will question some of Arathon's motives, and it's intentional. But I myself personally never even questioned for a second if Arathon was a villain, just because in every scene he's in, his empathy shines through. And here's the thing with the hero in black and the monster in white, is with this trope, most of the time, though there are a few exceptions, it's less so the reader that is being misled and more so people within the narrative. And this is used to play up like our own irritation, like, oh, why aren't these characters able to see Lysair for what he is? Now there's another series that does this very well. So I don't have the actual physical edition with me, but I'm representing it with my shirt, and that is Berserk by Kentaro Miura. The character of Guts and Griffith are, you know, Guts, we have that hero in black. I know people love Guts for being one of the most morally gray protagonists within anime manga. I actually completely disagree with this sentiment. I think if you take someone with Guts' backstory, with the pain he has gone through and the turmoil, and I mean, this guy has the bleakest of bleak backgrounds. And the way he defends others, yes, there are times where he can be selfish. Yes, there are times where he doesn't take the time to save others when it might have been within his ability. He's been jaded, but I think at the end of the day, Guts is a character that will do the right thing. I mean, he makes mistakes. I'm not here to say that Guts is a saint, but who other than a saint would be born to all that death and misery and darkness and still find a way through and defend others and be a beacon even when the world hates him, when they think of the Black Swordsman and they think of this monster, juxtaposed with Griffith, who everyone views as the savior. You know, he's like Berserk Jesus in the eyes of the people. And he is vile down to his core. That's the big difference between Berserk and Wars of Light and Shadow. Well, there's more differences than just that. But in terms of this trope, that is where these kind of diverge. I think Lysair is a very well-written villain, even though, as I said before, in my mind, he's a villain. He is morally gray while still being the villain of the story in my mind. Griffith, while being pretty boy, he is black as... You know, if we're talking like black and white morality, Griffith is about as black as it gets. But much like Lysair, you know that within his narcissistic viewpoint, he is the hero of this story. You know, this happens with Lysair. He doesn't actually go to bed thinking that he is the monster in white. He thinks that he's saving the world from this vile creature. Now, Griffith's relationship with Guts is a little bit different than Lysair and Erathon in that Griffith... I think my interpretation is that Griffith is in love with Guts, both emotionally and possibly sexually. But he has a massive obsession with him, verging on to probably eclipse like the Joker's obsession with Batman. I think he's in love with Guts, and I think in his mind, he's not nearly as evil as we as the audience know he is. So if I had to go off of these two so far, which did it better, I'd have to say Wars of Light and Shadow. Wars of Light and Shadow probably did it the best of all of these. And then next up, this is another one that's touched on the same thing, Malazan, Book of the Fallen. If we are to live, we must take risks, else our lives become deaths in all but name. There is no struggle too vast, no odds too overwhelming. For even should we fail, should we fall, we will know that we have lived. So we have the character of Animander Rake, which the way he's introduced to the reader in Gardens of the Moon, again, spoilers vague. I'm not going to get anything past, the first couple books. And even then, it won't be like plot details. It'll just be, if you don't want to know anything about Animander Rake, skip a little bit. I'll try to put timestamps down in the bottom, but don't hold me to that. So Animander Rake is portrayed in a way in the first few pages to make you think that he is a sort of villainous figure. And in my mind, he's one of the most empathetic characters in this series. I think if there was a literary equivalent to Erathon within this series, it would have to be either Animander or Tabor. Animander is a character, he's Mother Dark's favored son. He's this badass giant, soul-stealing sword. Like everything that you would think a bad guy would look like, that's how Animander Rake looks. And he's actually one of the kindest, most empathetic. And then the fact that he's been alive for eons, he's been alive for epochs, for thousands of years. I think it's thousands. He's definitely been alive for centuries. We know that much. I'm not really sure where Carcanus falls on the timeline, but Animander Rake's been around for a long time. He's a demigod type figure, but he is such a good person. And his kindness, you see the kinship he forms with characters like Corlat, like Whiskey Jack, and it is impossible not to have some love for Animander. Now, who is my monster in white? I want to say Osric or Berserk. Is it Berserk that's the father? You know who I'm talking about. I want to say him, but I'd have to go with the entire Tisti Leosan, the entire Tisti Leosan. These characters they almost feel like a Lysair type cult. They remind me a lot of Prince Lysair from Wars of Light and Shadow, though, again, a little bit more black morality, a little bit more juxtaposed with their Lysair really is the deepest version of the monster in white. But I do think the Tisti Leosan, much like Lysair, much like Griffith, there is a self-righteousness. There is this narcissism that they are the shining light, the beacon of purity. And while we never see a one-to-one Animander versus the Tisti Leosan, I think that thematically they stand for two opposing things. Animander is a character with amazing amounts of empathy and compassion, and the Tistilio-san are so all about judgment that they seem some of the most inhuman of the races within Malazan, up there with the folk rule Assail. Malazan, another series that does it very well. Now I have qualms about including this one on the list because I am not well read enough within this series, but I do think from what I've seen thus far, it may fall into this trope, or I'm just trying to talk about one of my new favorite series, Sun Eater by Christopher Rocchio. But the ugliness of the world does not fade, and fear and grief are not made less by time. We are only made stronger. We can only float together on their tides, as otters do, hand in hand. Hadrian Marlowe is the hero in black. All right, he is an edgelord. He's not, I mean, he is a drama queen, but he doesn't paint it like he's this evil, reprehensible monster. He knows what he's done. He has qualms with it, but he wouldn't take it back. But he tells the reader that he's responsible for genocide. He has destroyed a son, wiping out millions of lives. Then we get this character that is, he owns the dark aesthetic. And that's for all these characters, for Animander, for Guts, for Erathon, for Hadrian. If you were to just look at them, they would look like the villains of their series, they look like monsters. Hadrian probably the least of those I just mentioned, but I do think he just slightly falls into that. And with a third book being called Demon in White, which I have not read, I'm wondering how he's going to play with that, because the whole monster in white trope that I've been talking about, which I don't know where the story's going. Howling Dark brought this story to places I was never expecting. But I do think with the character of Hadrian, we are getting that hero in black, at least thus far where we're at in the narrative. He feels like a character that is kind of seen as this genocidal person, at least in the current time that the story is being written and conveyed and being told to the audience. We're operating under that preconceived notion that he is a monster, that he does monstrous things. But every choice he's made thus far does seem to be the most noble. I do think he is the most noble of the Palatines. I do think that he has amazing amounts of empathy, especially considering what he came from. Lord Alistair Marlowe is a jackass, and I think Hadrian is an absolute gift. But yeah, those are some examples of heroes in black and monsters in white. It's a trope that I've really been drawn to of late. So if you can think of any similar to this type of trope, let me know. I love these types of stories, and peace.